Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the first episode of our podcast, where we will be reflecting on our 4 years in high school, offering advice for younger kids and other kids who are our age, kind of reflecting on their experiences and processing everything. Obviously, with the pandemic, we have a lot of time on our hands. So we wanted this to be a space to just kind of like offer ideas and collaborate through discussion and just kind of like share our experiences. So my name is John Fullerton.
My name is Derek Turner the third. You know what it is.
Dylan here, Dylan Vincent, senior at Breck. Been here since preschool.
And I'm Roberto Ayana, also senior at Breck, and I've been here since third grade.
I think I should also add, I'm also a senior, been there since kindergarten.
Some
Guess
lifers in here.
Super lifer here.
Super. Oh yeah, this guy's a super
Super
lifer.
lifer. Wow.
Old man
That's
here.
what's up.
Yeah.
Old
14
man.
years. All right. So why are you guys here?
Me personally, I'm here just to share my experiences because I know my track's a little bit different. It's I think very few people in the Breck class typically decide to go to HBCUs. So there's a specific track there. There's a specific mindset that led me on this path to choose an HBCU. And I think that is in just senior year in general. I think the growth from freshman year, fifth grade me to now, I think a lot of my classmates, a lot of my friends can say like that's been a huge part. And I think it's just been a huge transformation. So being able to share like what that process was like, what was going on, and even understanding that there's still more to go is why I want to be here.
For sure. For me, I feel like we're at a really interesting place in our lives right now. We're in between like two really big stages. We've all been through high school, through middle school, all that, and we're going into college. And we're like in that space in between right now. And I think that's an interesting place to like reflect on everything that's gone on up to this point and kind of process our experiences at Breck, think about the college process, and hopefully share some game with younger people who are about to go through what we went through this past year. So, yeah.
Yeah, kind of mirroring Dylan and Derek. I think I haven't done a lot of reflecting recently, and I think like we're coming down to the end of our high school experiences. It's nearly over, and I think like it's a good time now to do so. I think it's also good because I know as a younger student, guidance from older kids wasn't like something I really got. I'm like the oldest in my family. And also just like I wasn't really tight with a lot of upperclassmen I didn't know. I didn't talk to a lot. So I think I operated a really like blindly, I'd say, through the my upper school experience. So I think like having something like this for younger kids to watch, to relate to is good. And I think at the end of the day, I like working with y'all. I like talking with y'all. It's always a good time. So
I like what Robert said about like kind of being the oldest sibling. I have an older sister, but she's 3 years older than me, and we're very different. And so I've always felt like I'm an older sibling because I've had a very different life than she has. And I think I'm here one because I've had some upperclassmen who, when I was younger, shared a lot of like advice and wisdom, and like that had a big effect on me. And so if like something I could do before I leave was like kind of share some of the stuff that I've learned with other kids and hopefully help them make decisions, I'd be happy to do that. And I think another thing too is like earlier in my senior year, I expected to have more time to like process and reflect on my time in high school and at Breck. Um, during like graduation and, my last prom or last sports game or whatever, I thought I'd have more time to kind of wade into that kind of like mindset of reflection. And with the pandemic, everything just kind of like seemed to end like that. And I've kind of like been on shock in like this kind of weird limbo state between like still having online classes, but really being done with my high school experience. So I'm really looking forward to kind of having this as like an opportunity to just kind of like sort things out in a productive way. So, yeah.
For sure.
I think a lot of us have talked about how like we've had, I think like Derek said, from like fifth grade on, and I'm just kind of curious, like we've all had kind of moments that we can point to in our time at school when we've kind of like, changed. And I'm curious, like, what were those moments for you guys? Like what kind of like sparked that change, and like, how do you guys like reflect on that? So I guess Derek specifically, you said fifth grade,
Yeah.
like what happened in fifth grade, man?
Yeah, so you called me out there, so I guess I got to start. Fifth grade, not gonna lie, I think I got suspended 11 times.
Oh
I
my
can
God.
confirm.
I
Like
didn't even know that.
yeah, like fifth
Probably
grade,
good.
some like a lot of the suspensions were not even suspensions, but like things that would got me sent to the office were things that honestly just like just shouldn't be that big of a deal. But because like Breck is a place where like if you have to fit the rules and like we if you don't follow those rules, the only way that we discipline you is to the office. And it was just like a buildup of multiple things. So like I got in trouble for computer violations. Like once you get to like seven, once you
Bro,
You was
seven,
rack. How'd you rack that up?
Miss Critta was feeding from my
Oh
laptop
my God.
after lunch. Like I
she
just
was different, bro, honestly.
yeah, she was definitely like chasing down my laptop. But there was also times in my sixth or in my English class where one of the teachers was trying to move on from the lesson. I specifically remember this. And I was playing Axis football. And she was like, all right, like we're waiting for everybody to move on. Like, Derek, can you finish? And I'm sitting here playing Axis football, swiping in between like the work and then the football game. And she's waiting on me. And Miss Critta ended up like calling me out and I had to go to the office for that. And I think that was like my fifth offense led into this thing. And like they're like, all right, you get like an in-school suspension the rest of the day. And it was just like little things like that that kind of like built up this like why am I always in the office? I don't like want to talk to Mr. Duncan. I don't want to talk to Mr. Faber. I don't want to be like known on a first name basis for the office people. Just like, oh, what'd you do this time? And I'm like, come on, like sometimes like I just didn't feel like I felt like sometimes like it wasn't my fault and I wasn't in control. And like just that feeling of not being in control was something that kind of just changed my perspective of just like, all right, like get your stuff together, Derek. And then also the punishment when I got home. My dad is strict on doing
I know
push-ups.
he was on that.
Bro,
Yeah.
bro. Like I get home, like just like sitting there anticipating like what the workout's gonna be when he got home. Because it was like yelling, and then it was like, all right, push, 25 push-ups, like 3-minute wall sit, like squats, and I'm like,
That's why you so buff now.
That's how he got the
Yeah.
muscles, bro.
Yeah, all the
You're always
suspensions.
a troublemaker.
Um,
hey,
I guess.
hey,
Yeah, dude.
it worked. It worked. All you have to do once you hit those like 100 push-ups for like getting in trouble once, it changes the game. It changes the game. So sixth grade, seventh grade, eighth grade, like I really like made it a point to like be on my best behavior as well as present myself in the best way possible because I am representing my family. Like to have my parents come to the school constantly, like was just embarrassing. Like I'm sitting there like in front of the whole school, everyone's like, dang, like they're getting in trouble again. Like it's just like, all right, it's now like serious. Like I've had my fun, but I realized it's not worth it. It's not worth like my parents' expense. It's not worth the push-ups. Not worth the muscle soreness. Like it's just fix what I'm in control of, and was the biggest change in fifth grade.
Sure. So I guess like one thing that kind of popped in my mind was like, do you think the system like worked there then? Because like if you got these suspensions and then all of a sudden like it clicked in your mind like I don't want this to like be me. Like what do we think was like the purpose of those suspensions? Was it like for you to reflect and like punish? Because it seemed like if the school is like faced with a situation where like a kid's like violating the policies or whatever, how do we like get it so he's no longer doing that? It seems like in some way like it was effective in kind of like changing that, but I'm curious like how you guys think about that.
I mean, I guess I'll speak on that. I think it I think there was like empathy, the fact that like a lot of the things were like not big enough where I was like physically putting people in harm's way. That like I think there's two instances where like there was actually like two physical altercations. One was by accident. I was chasing Max McCoy on the hallway after a game. I think he kicked me, and I tried to chase him down and retaliate, and I missed and kicked Destiny out of.
That was so funny.
So, but then the worst part was she turned around to chase me. I ran into the door. It's right when she was opening the door, and she sent me to the office just because I ran into the door. And then I ended up telling on myself. So that was like, that was one thing. Like, just the first reaction was go to the office. And that's how bad it was. And I think to an extent, like, that makes sense. It does, like, you just, like, know that there's people who've had it up to here and you have a reputation. And it's a matter of like just changing that. Like it's just like, all right, like this is not the reputation I want. My parents both care for me dearly, and that's not why I'm in this school, to be in the office constantly getting sent home. For sure.
Do you think another part of it would be like your racial like makeup? Because I feel like in a lot of situations, like you could be doing the same exact thing as say the blonde kid right next to you, but you're the one that gets sent to the office. And I don't know, there's a lot of like factors that may play into it, but that's one thing I've been hearing from my mom, who's telling me about sort of the similar things that are happening in like the middle school today, to boys that are getting called out among a sea of other boys that don't look like them for the same thing that everyone's doing. And so I feel like there's a lot that goes into it because everyone has a ton of energy. Like you're not the only kid that had a ton of energy at that age. So I think approaching it with that lens of like, okay, why are you automatically drawn to Derek that's doing all this stuff that another person may be doing? So I feel like those administrators need to really look at their practices and make sure they're coming from like a clear conscience with that type of stuff.
Yeah, I can speak to that too, because like Dylan was saying, he's got a sister in 7th grade, and so he knows. But I also have a brother in 7th grade, and like I've heard from him how, like, with these things, it's really difficult because you can't. It's never going to be obvious that bias someone has. It's always discreet, and I think that's what makes it difficult to target, to talk about. But the issue I think is like John was asking Derek before, do you think like the system worked? Because eventually like Derek, he's now this amazing dude who like he doesn't step out of line. He's not a troublemaker no more. He's had like the biggest development and maturity I've seen. But I think the issue is like it shouldn't be like punishment based, you know, like even though you can say at the end of the day it worked for Derek, it still feels like all their punishments, it had no purpose. It wasn't like they weren't trying to help him. They were more trying to just like say like give him a slap on the wrist and send him on his way. And I feel like that's something also inherently wrong with like kind of the system, is because instead of focusing on like correcting and like fixing for the future, it's always just a reaction, like a punishment at the time. And so I think in Derek's case it works, but for someone who like gets caught up into that, once you build up that I feel like that reputation also sucks, because like Derek said, eventually he builds up this reputation where anything he does, I could do the same exact thing, but I'm not going to get called out if I make the mistake while Derek is. And that it's kind of a hole you sink into, and it's really easy to get lost in that, I feel like. So I don't know. I feel like inherently it's sort of wrong.
I think that's a spot on description, because like 5th grade, there was not really a teacher that I really could connect with. Like I think my 5th grade advisor was Mr. Jones, and his big thing was like, I'm always on your team. And whenever I got in trouble, he was like, I can't help you, man. Like that's tough. And I'm like there wasn't a relationship that was fostered and that was built there where I felt like I could go to him if I was having a problem. And I just think like there was just like 5th grade coming from 4th grade. 4th grade was also another bad year, but that was because a particular teacher, will go nameless, was very like adamant on sending me and Alec Bashant and Jack Shapiro to the office for like very minor things. And it was just like one of the biggest things that bothered me and carried into 5th grade year was that I had this particular look that was like, when she was like yelling at me, I'd get upset and I'd look at her and she said, don't look at me that way, like go to the office. And as a 4th grader as a 4th grade boy to know that like it's because like of your race that look is intimidating to her, it scares her, and that's what's going to get you sent to the office, not for what you did, but the look that you gave because you were angry when this was going on, is what sent you to the office. To try to like describe that as a 4th grader but not have the words to that, I think. And like it was just in succession. So 4th grade to 5th grade, it kind of carried over. But then 6th grade, I think that's when I met Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson started taking me under his wing, and so did Mr. Odin. And that was kind of like the progression of like the change of like, all right, like start to focus more on your books than like focusing more on like the social, like encompassing like what it's like to be like the cool kid or the kid that's getting all the attention. It's okay to put your head down. It's okay to start focusing on yourself. And like that was the school's help there. And that was what, I guess, like started that change. And again, it goes back to like, did this system work? Robert, you bring up a very valid point. Robert and Dylan, like it is a very slippery slope when it comes down to the conversation of race with that child. And it feels like if that is in that bias, like you can't, it's hard to say you have a bias, but not feel like you have any evidence for it.
Sure.
So I guess like keeping on like theme of the podcast, like what advice would you give to younger kids who like know what that look is that you were describing, you know, or find themselves in that situation? You know, like how, like what would be the words that like Mr. Johnson or Mr. Odin gave to you that kind of like, you know, made you like quote unquote like wake up, or kind of shift your perspective on things to kind of be, you know, like make the most of the situation?
I think it was honestly just like classroom conversation. Like it was just like a mutual understanding that like I don't think there was like a specific moment where they said something to me that really changed it. It was just like being in their presence and like, yo, like set like laying the groundwork, like foundations, like don't mess around in my class. This is my expectation I have for you. Do not break this expectation. I think just coming from those two particular men at that time, also not having that many male teachers, especially black male teachers in the middle school, like coming from them setting that expectation, knowing that that was how they perceived me and that's how they wanted me to act. And I was like, okay, like this is different. Like then they're like having those positive interactions, knowing that they're like, that's what it meant for them to actually be on my team, to set expectations and hold me to those expectations without having office be first, just having like a real conversation. Like, yo, like this is not acceptable. Versus the teachers that just wanted to send me to the office to just like push everything so they can move forward. And I think those were like, that was like the moment I was like, okay, like let me start to slow down and actually think like let me slow down and actually see how I'm being perceived by my teachers. And these teachers who actually are caring for me, let me not let them down.
I think that's interesting because I think what Derek is kind of alluding to is like there's like I was talking about, I feel like there's two different paths you can take with like, especially when you're disciplining younger kids in like middle school. We all know is like it's really like a time of turmoil. You don't know what you're doing, you don't know where you're at, you just going through it like all the time. And I think it's like you can take the path where you say like don't ever do this again, like this is wrong, punish, right? Or you can go through that talking through, you can build that connection. And I think that's what like Derek is talking about with Mr. Out and Mr. Johnson. It's like just having that connection with the teacher. Like I think it's you get an insider perspective kind of thing, and you kind of like, I don't know, you just respect people more when you have this build this connection. Like I don't feel like if someone like just punishes me, I don't feel the need to like, I'm obviously always gonna like despise that person because like I have no connection. But if you build that connection, you get an understanding of where they're coming from. It's so much easier to understand, oh, this is what I'm doing wrong, this is why it needs to change, you know. I felt like being an administrator is obviously a very difficult job, but I feel like not enough administrators take the time to build connection with students. And so like teachers are obviously like the adults that I feel like are easiest to build connections with as a student in the building. But I think like as an administrator, it's important to do that, even though it's difficult because you have a lot of stuff to do. But I don't know. Yeah.
I think it's important to like point out that, you know, for the people who either don't know us, you know, hopefully this podcast is blown up and there's people from all over the country listening to this. We went to a small private Episcopalian school with like 100 or so kids in the grade. And so if, you know, Robert is expressing, you know, these feelings of like administrators and teachers not being able to develop like close enough connections with their students, the first thing that I thought of was like, well, you know, like what is it like at, you know, Wayzata, where there's like, you know, thousands of kids in a grade or something, or, you know, other public schools in North Minneapolis and all over the country where there's just like so many kids and so few teachers, or the quality of teachers have gone down. You know, that was the first thing I thought about, is like, you know, if we feel like we're not developing close enough connections with our, you know, teachers and mentors, what is it like in other parts of the country?
We kind of talked about like tremendous change, but John Fullerton, we have not talked about your change from 6th to 7th grade. When you came back one summer, just all of a sudden, like 3 feet taller, like just
Yeah.
deep voice, like, "Hey guys." So how about we talk like talking about like puberty hitting very hard,
Yeah,
and also talking about like kind of this new kind of found clout.
totally. Yeah.
I mean, just kind of dive into like what was that change like for you, like from going from 6th grade summer to 7th grade beginning of the school year?
I mean, like, you're right. I definitely went through a lot of change during that year. And I think, yeah. And I think when I look back on that, I kind of like look at who I was before, and I was like this pretty short, like chunky kid. And you know, I there wasn't a lot of respect on my name back then, and not that there is now, but you know, a lot of the time I was kind of like the butt of the joke and stuff. And it was weird because I went from kind of being somebody that, you know, didn't think highly of myself, or didn't, you know, think that my friends, you know, I always thought that like I would be like a secondary friend or something. Like, you know, if you're, you know, picking people to hang out with, you'd pick like other people and then you'd pick me or something. And I think for me, that was like that change, that quick change in like 7th and 8th grade kind of sparked a lot of like reflection in like 9th grade, sophomore year. Cause I think that's when I kind of started to realize like a lot of the gifts that I'd been given. Cause it's not like I had like come from nothing. Obviously I, you know, had an awesome like upbringing, but I think like going from somebody who like didn't value like, or didn't like see the gifts that I'd been given, because I was like being made fun of at school and stuff, to like all of a sudden like, you know, being like seen as being like more athletic and just like taller than like my middle school peers. I think that that's what kind of led me to realize like, oh, like, you know, I've got some like cool stuff going on here, but like what else do I have kind of like going for me? And I think that that's kind of like where I'd say like, I think when we're talking about like our journeys, like Derek was talking about like from like 5th grade on. And I think for me, the start of like the kind of mindset that I'm in now is really like 9th and 10th grade, when I was kind of realizing like, oh, like I'm like a tall kid, and like you know, I'm like tall, I'm white, I'm, you know, Catholic, I'm straight, I am growing up in an you know, upper class family. And I think for me, like realizing all that, and then I think also just like being born in Minnesota, like I feel like I've had like one of the best upbringings that like anybody could ask for. And I think it was when I kind of started kind of counting my blessings that I realized, you know, I have a lot of responsibility. And I think it was just kind of like going from like the short chunky kid to like being somebody who was like respected more. It was just like, it was overwhelming at first, and definitely like 7th and 8th grade, I definitely like was really feeling myself and made a lot of mistakes then too. But I think like it was a lot of guilt too. Because like, for example, growing up wealthy, for people who haven't grown up wealthy, it's always like seen as like, you know, infinitely better. And as somebody who hasn't known anything else, I can't really comment on if it's better or not. But, you know, my father grew up in a very wealthy family, and he's, you know, a lot of his friends from high school and lower school have been like huge drug addicts, because, you know, they grew up trust fund kids and they've never had to work in their life, and their like lives are like hollow, and they never really like kind of had to like struggle for anything. And so this definitely isn't like a, you know, it was, I think it was just me realizing that, you know, not only was I wealthy, but like my parents weren't divorced and they still like gave me attention, and, you know, I had good friends and stuff. So it was like, I guess like my journey was just kind of realizing like how, you know, not to like brag, but like how awesome things have been for me, and to like really like then figure out like what I want to do with that from there. So I feel like, to answer your question, like that's kind of like where I am now. And I guess that's kind of like an introduction of like my personality to like this podcast for now. But I like to hear from like Robert and Dylan too.
For sure. I got one question real quick.
Yeah.
So you talked about kind of some of that like privilege stuff in your senior speech. And I was wondering, what does that like translate into? Like, does it translate into your work ethic in school? Like being more ambitious because you feel like you've been given so much, you have to produce so much,
Yeah.
or is it easier to just like sit in that and just like, I don't know,
Like
feel
enjoy
yourself,
it or
I guess.
whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, enjoy it.
I think for me it was like at first like kind of like asking like what, and this was, you know, this question was kind of sparked in like my justice and AP US history class, but like what does like success mean to me? And, you know, if we're like rating like, you know, happiness on a scale or like success on a scale of like 0 to 10, for me it was like always just like ending up in that 10 spot, but I felt like I'd been born at like 8 or 9, you know? And so I think for me it was more like distance covered, and I'd love to like, you know, finish a lot further along the road than where I started. And I think like for me, um, realizing that I've been given these gifts, a lot of it was like I process a lot of this through my older sister because we love having like discussions too. And I think for me, where I've like kind of like concluded what I want to do is like with the kind of gifts that I've been given and the privilege that I've been given, I'd love to be like somebody who has a profound impact. So like Derek mentioned, like Mr. Johnson and Mr. Odin, and I've had people throughout my life, whether it's like teachers or athletic coaches or like even older siblings. Like I think we all know people who have had like an impact on us as like a mentor. And I think for me, like if I can make somebody's life better by just like kind of like, you know, showing them that like somebody cares about them, if, you know, they either don't feel that way, or like if I have like something to give them that other people can't, like that's just kind of like what I want to do, is just kind of like be like, it's cliche, but like be a leader. And I think like that's also been like an identity that I've been like grappling with for a while. But I think to answer your question, like it's been Dylan of like, what do I do with like my privilege? It's like, it's a mixture of just like being really guilty too. Like, especially like going to college next year, I definitely don't feel like I have like earned the spot, you know, at the school that I'm going to. And it's like a mix of just kind of like feeling, you know, like crappy about yourself, because like, if I'm not motivated to like turn in a math quiz, you know, like what, you know, of all people who should have like the freedom and ability to turn in a math quiz, it should be somebody like me. But the fact that like I procrastinate stuff and I like don't get all my work in, there's like a lot of guilt around that. But I think it's kind of like, just like, what do I, you know, how do I, if I analyze it, like, how do I no longer become guilty? It's like, if I start helping people. And I think that that's kind of like what I've realized.
So, Barry, let's start with you, bro.
So if we're talking like turning points in our life, I think I've been on an interesting trajectory too. Unlike, I think like I'm really opposite of Derek when it comes to this, in the fact that like I came to Breck in 3rd grade. It was like a rough couple of years. Actually, I don't know. I wouldn't call it rough. I would say it was different because at my old public school, I was really like, I was a really social kid. And then I came to Breck. I was popping. I was, bro. During recess time, I was the guy. But nah, it was just, yeah, I was really social. I came to Breck, and coming to Breck is obviously difficult, I think, no matter what time you come to Breck, because it's such a tight-knit community. Everyone knows who they mess with, who they like, and so it's really hard to like get involved with other people. But I think so that definitely played a part in it. But I think also like, at least literally starting 3rd grade, I was on my grind, like the books, the grades. I was on all of that. That's what I needed, those A's, and whatever I had to do to get them. That was about it. So like up until 7th grade, which I say is the turning point, is like I was kind of like a floater. I didn't have like a friend group or nothing. I just talked with people, experimented, just like, I don't know. I wasn't social at all, really. And then 7th grade is around the time I started hanging out with y'all more. And I think that was a major turning point, because like I started to value other things for sure in my life. Like I didn't only like hitting the books wasn't as like, it wasn't as satisfying. You know what I mean? It was still satisfying getting that, but I realized there was different value in different things. And so I know that was a pretty major one. And then I think my final one, well, it's not my final one, but my next one came end of 10th grade year. And that was a big one, because I think what that was for me was I really became like set in who I am, became a lot more confident, and I don't know, I did a lot of reflecting then, and I like had a much better understanding of who I am, where I came from, and what that means. And I think that was a really interesting point in my life, because like I said, 7th grade was the time I started to become a lot more social. But I realized, like, when I was becoming social, like, I had sacrificed a lot of who I was to fit in, to talk to the people I wanted to talk to. And I was scared that if I didn't sacrifice that stuff, I think I wouldn't like have friends. I wouldn't be who I am, you know? But 10th grade come around, like, I don't know, I did a lot of reflecting. That's what I have to say. And I think I really changed, and I didn't change. I just became set in like who I am and confident. So, yeah.
For sure. I really resonate with that story for real. Like in middle school, I was the same way. All I was really focused on was one, Call of Duty, but then it was the grades. Like I had to hit, I don't know, I think it might have been a confidence thing too, because like I felt like I had to hit those markers of what's deemed as like excellent to like feel good about myself and feel like I'm on top of things.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that's necessarily bad, but I feel like there is more to an education than getting marks. And that's something I sort of gradually came into as I progressed through middle school and upper school. But another thing in middle school, all I wanted to be was a doctor. And that was kind of beneath what was driving me, was that one goal. And as I sort of got into higher and higher up in the education system, I realized like maybe that's not really for me. Like I don't enjoy the chemistry class as much as I do the econ class or the English class type of thing. And that was kind of a changing point for me, because it's like, okay, maybe let me look up and see like what the world is outside of like hitting grades and meeting these expectations that I had for myself that weren't necessarily based in my truth or like myself. And so I think coming into yourself is one of the most beautiful things about high school, because I mean, it's awesome to like understand who you are in the context of your surroundings, and then like rely on that and like lean on that going into the next stage. And so I think that was probably one of the biggest things for me.
Were there any specific moments or situations that kind of like, you know, made you like, you mentioned like shift of like looking at yourself other than like somebody who's like wants to be a doctor versus like other classes, but also like socially or like kind of like coming into yourself? Like, was there any specific moments?
Yeah, but I talked about this in my my college essay actually. I kind of use my hair as like a marker of different points in my life. And in middle school, I had locks. I've had locks for a while back then, and they were long, and that was just part of my appearance, I guess, or whatever. And it was funny because I had this image in my head of like a successful man or a successful Black man or whatever. And it didn't look like what I looked like. It wasn't the image of myself that I saw in the mirror. For whatever reason, whatever signals were sending me that was the message that I was taking in. And so I ended up cutting my hair just for that sole purpose. I actually loved my hair at the time, but I felt like it didn't match this constructed image of success. I think that a lot of us have in different ways. I wasn't meeting that for myself. And looking back, as Roberta said, as you get older, you start to do a little bit more reflecting. And writing your college essay is a really big like reflection point, because they give you 500 words to say something about yourself. And for some reason that was like coming back into my mind, and it was just like, damn, like I really sacrificed my authenticity for this idea of success that I had. And I feel like that was a really big turning point. Like personally, we're talking about academics and social and stuff, but personally, that was definitely like a reflection point for me.
I got a question for that. Because I know this is like, I feel you when you say like, there's that constructed social like belief sort of expectation people have when they think of successful person, and it goes even deeper when you're talking about successful Black man. So like my question is, do you think that was something that was pressed onto you, like that was something you were always seeing around? Or this is like my understanding, because this is kind of how it was for me, did you think it was more the fact that like nobody was really reaching out, showing you the different avenues that like you can do this and you're still successful, you can do this, you can still be successful? Like, was there never that support, or was it more like an active repression of what you wanted to do?
That's a really interesting question. I definitely don't think it was an active repression.
Mm-hmm.
But I think when we're looking at what we think is successful, you're only grabbing from the table of options that you see. And my table happened to be a very narrow, small table of what I saw as what success is.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had no like reference point to see anything else. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So I sort of just reached to that table to like fulfill my ego or my needs for, or my vision of what success looked like. And growing up, not only seeing like other tables, but just like other foods, other, like there's so much that you can do in the world, so much that you can be in the world. But you need to have your eyes open for one, and need to have access to the information, to the role models to actually see that. So I think that was a big thing. Exposure.
Yeah, because I think that's how I like understood it to be. Because I think it's like middle school. We're talking about middle school. It's an interesting point in everyone's lives, because I think you're becoming more perceptive, but you never get like the context behind things. So you see something and you're never getting that explanation. Well, not necessarily, but it's, if you don't get that explanation, you have to come to your own conclusions. And I think that's difficult to do. Like without that active support, it's really difficult, because middle school, you're not so sure of yourself. You're not sure of what you're doing. And so that support is so vital during that time, because it gives you like kind of a crutch to lean on, I think. And I don't know, like middle school, I always think about, like I think back to, because it's such a, I don't know, it's just interesting, because there's a lot of development that happens, and a lot that like you don't really understand has happened until you've grown older. Talking to Dylan's point again, sorry, y'all can cut me off if y'all want,
No,
but Dylan was saying his hair was kind of his symbolism of like his kind of growth. I think for me, like if I would pick one, it'd be my name, which is definitely tied into my culture. I think like I said, 7th grade, I started becoming more social. I started hanging around with people, and like John said, like before he had that kind of growth spurt, kind of hit puberty, he was kind of the butt of the joke all the time. And so I found myself as a 7th grader, like coming into this new friend group. That was kind of me. I was the butt of the joke like all the time. And this was before I had like also hit my growth spurt and everything. So I was so yeah, I was always kind of the kid who got picked on. And like it wasn't really like, I kind of just let that shit, I let it slide. Like I didn't I didn't think it was that bad. So I didn't think it was gonna be that bad. So I always said, it doesn't mean nothing. And you know, I don't think I realized at the time how bad it was, because like eventually some of it started like reaching into like jokes about like my culture, where I come from. I'm a first gen immigrant. My parents are first gen, so they're from Ethiopia. They immigrated here in '95. I should probably give a little background. So I'm the first of my generation to be here in America, and it's been such a interesting journey for me, because I've seen a lot. Like I always say this, but I think I live in like 3 different worlds all at the same time. When I'm at school, I'm living in this it's a PWI, the school we go to also. So I'm living in one world where it's like really white dominated, white dominant culture. And then I feel like at the same time, when I'm at school, I'm also living in a black dominated culture. Like I feel like those two coexist in a sense. And then I come home and I'm living in a more African based culture. And I don't know, you learn a lot of how to navigate it during that time. And like in middle school, it was always me trying to repress my African side. Like it wasn't something I was proud of, you know. I wouldn't say it was a negative side, but it wasn't something I wanted to flaunt when I was at school. Like I like to keep them separate, you know. And I think that was like a bad decision, like I said, because it really starts to weigh on you, because if you're always repressing half a side of you wherever you're at. You're never like really becoming your true self. You're never really showing that. And so like in 10th grade, like I said, that's when I started to really reflect, and I kind of like said enough. Like I thought it was foolish. Like there's a couple like actual like really like moments for me, like turning moments. Like one of them was, I remember a kid made a joke in the glass balcony about African people, and I said, and like I don't know what took me that day, but I was like, you do that again, I'm gonna slap you, right? And he said it again, and so I went over and slapped him. I'm not gonna name the kid, but if y'all remember who that was. But I think after that I was like, dang, this feels good to like actually like be like prideful. Like I for the first time ever, I didn't like let it slide. And then another time in English class, Derek and John were there for this, is when a sub was talking about my name at roll call, and my name has 2 A's at the end. It's like significant in our culture and Ethiopian culture, but it like he said like, is this a typo? And he started laughing, and I actually did let that one go because it's hard to stand up to authority at that age. And then someone said something to me after, like, you're just gonna let it slide. And that's like, I don't know, that did a lot for me to reflect on as well. So I think, yeah, like coming into yourself is, like Dylan said, it's really beautiful because you just become more comfortable, natural wherever you're at. But yeah, sorry, that was long.
No, that was good
that
stuff.
was definitely worth it. That was great.
So again, this is our first episode, and we were kind of like new, and we didn't know like how we wanted to start it off. But I think what this kind of became is like almost like an introduction to who we are, and kind of like explain kind of like what landed us, right here talking to a computer in the middle of a pandemic. So is there anything that like let's say this is like an introductory to our podcast, like is there anything that you guys think is like important for the audience to know about you guys that is like central to who you are, and like understanding in the future when we have discussions on like college or like education, or just like being like an 18-year-old guy in 2020, like what do you think is like something that's central, so that when people hear your voice or see you on the screen, if they don't know you, or if they do know you, that like they can have that in the back of their head to kind of like understand who you are, where you're coming from, or just like kind of get a better informed view of who you are.
I think I touched on mine. That's my identity. But yeah, what y'all think?
I think one thing I'd add is that like I feel like in my high school career has always kept like a level of like secrecy to like I guess my personal life. I think Robert and Dylan can speak on this. They always call me Rey
Mysterio.
Yeah, you get your last. But I think like there's still a part of me that doesn't like being vulnerable to like I guess my background, because I think it's like I feel like it's one that's like you're like generic, like kid from the hood comes in and like now starting to pursue like higher education. Like seriously being vulnerable, but like my background is very difficult. I think people understand like I come from North Minneapolis, like born and raised, like I'll rep that. But I'm also like 3 generations of like people in St. Paul, not just like regular people, but like community leaders, like my great grandma was like best friends with like the first Black police chief of St. Paul, and like constant conversations when I was a baby, when she was still alive, when I was a baby, like constant conversations in her living room. That just kind of like speaks to like the depth of the history of St. Paul and Minneapolis and like Minnesota. And like for me, I'm a big family person. Like if you're in my friend group, you're in my tight friend group, like you are considered my family. I'll break my back for you. Like I'll give you like the coat off like my back. Like that's my goal. That's how I'm trying to roll. And that's how serious I am about like keeping like those close to me who are important. With that being said, I have a massive family and a complicated one too. I have a stepmom, a half sister, mom, and a father, all are completely different, separate households. But each of those was a compass of my identity from middle school to high school. And I think those different phases of living in which house, understanding like how each adult has influenced me, having that all come together is like now as an 18-year-old, as like it's changed my perception of like there is no one way to do life correctly. You can make your own choices. You make your own mistakes, and you still build on that. It's just a tenacity that you can't teach. You just have to figure it out as you go on with life. And I mean, it's just that level of vulnerability that like I put at distance with is something that has like, it's just the level of vulnerability is difficult with such as like a background that I feel like not many people understand, or it takes a lot of explaining. And I think to dig that deep into someone, to get to know someone, get to know their character, I think that is like that's what I stand. That's what I'm about. Because I understand that not everything is surface level. There's something more to that.
For sure. One thing I've been thinking about is like when John mentioned privilege earlier, I think privilege comes in many different forms. And I think we all have access to different privilege. That's not necessarily one above the other. You know what I mean? Like Derek having the family that he has shaped him in ways that would never shape another person in another family situation, and grown him in ways that would have never grown other people in other situations. And so I feel like that's really interesting to hear. And understanding someone's story is like so central to understanding like how they move in the world. And so I'm really thankful for that. For me, a little bit more background. I was like born and raised in the suburbs type thing, and coming from that environment into Breck, it didn't leave me a lot of room to like explore spaces that looked like me for the most part. It was basically my home, my church, and Jack and Jill. And that's basically what I had as like my Black community. And something that I'm about as I've come into myself more is being in a space without seeing myself in a space, and taking who I am into any space, regardless of whether I'm reflected in the majority of the population of that space, and building communities in those spaces and being myself in those spaces. A big part of me coming into that was the conversations I've had with Mr. Slack, Paul Slack, really great guy. And he kind of epitomizes that for me. The way he shows up in Breck, the way he moves in Breck and influences people is really a source of inspiration to me, because it's so needed in a space like that to make people feel comfortable and at home in a space they aren't usually felt that way in. And so just being authentic and connecting to my roots is something I'm big about also.
I think something for me that I've like really tried to work on over like the last year, and I'd say it's like not as much a big part of my identity, but more like I guess who I am, if those things are any different at all. But I think like self-improvement has something that like I've really kind of like loved studying, and I think like through podcasts, and I think like the podcasts that I've listened to have like inspired my, you know, kind of hopes that this one is successful too. Shout out Dan Carlin. But I think like for me, I've always wanted to like always kind of be like the best self I could be. And again, that's very cliche, but I think like as you get older, you realize that like the world isn't perfect and other people aren't perfect and adults aren't perfect. I think that was a big thing that I've realized in the past 2 years, that like, you know, when you're young, you never realize that there are like horrible adults in your life, and they are just as much children as like the, you know, 15-year-old standing next to you. But I think like for me, like in part of this podcast that I want to be, it's just like figuring out myself better, like more like self-awareness, and really just like trying to critique and analyze and like break down every like aspect of myself and my personality, and find out like how I can make that the best, or like where I can do to improve. And I think like that's really, I think like the vehicle for that has been discussion. Everybody here in this podcast, me, Dylan, Derek, and Rivera, we started like the Civil Discourse Club at our school on like the principles of like discussion. And I think like for me, discussion like externally with you guys, but also like internally with myself, has been like a very big like aspect of like my growth over the past like 2 or 3 years. So I'd say like that's a pretty like central part of like where I'm at right now. So
we want to touch on our like plans for next year real quick.
All right, real quick. I think like the fact that you touched on like realizing that not all adults are like, perfect, not always right. Like that's a huge realization that like adults aren't always right. They don't know the right answers. They can give like their best, but they can also give you their worst. Like they're human, and there's there's no one way for that. There's no, I guess, correct way to be an adult. You just like again figure it out as you go, and you figure out that what's given to you is not always the best. Not yeah. I just think like the biggest step on everyone in this podcast is John, Roberta, Dylan. It's now how can we be the best selves we can be moving forward and still maintain our identity and still maintain who we like intrinsically are. And I think like just like thinking about like what's gonna happen like this first and second semester of like our college semesters is it's gonna be deeply moving for each of us. And I'm excited. I'm so excited to hear like the stories and see what we come back with. And that I think that it's also another thing of just community, just being able to like branch out to all these other places, branch out across the country, coast to coast, and then come back together and share those experiences.
On that note, Derek, do you want to share what your plans are for next year?
Yeah, you know, I'm going to HU, Howard University, the illustrious HBCU. Yeah, that was just something I feel like I had to do. Coming from a neighborhood like North Minneapolis, having the stigma that education is not. Actually, I'll take a step back. It's not even like coming from North Minneapolis. It was a self, like within the Black community. I just felt like I didn't want it to be questioned of like who I am and what I'm about. So like if I'm telling someone where I go to school, Howard University, like already like they get like a perception, at least within the Black community, that like I'm down for the community. Like it's not a question. Like I'm like serious about like what we can do to improve. However, there needs to be a moment where I need to find out as an individual what my pursuits of or how I'm going to do that. How am I going to pursue building up the community as well as building up my own knowledge and building up my own capital as that goes on, and like what my job and what my future is going to look like. And I think that was something that like I was just like in order to find myself, and you go to an all Black space, predominantly Black space, and experience that because you only get that experience once. And that was in the forefront of my mind when I was picking my colleges.
Do you know what you want to study?
Honestly, I can't say I'm like 100% certain on what. Like I can look at like business seems attractive to me, but it also seems like very like vanilla. There's many different ways you can go with that, but as a freshman, I just wanted to like take my time to get like immersed in like what's around me and what the options are.
Sure. I can go next, I guess. I'll be taking my talents to New Haven, Connecticut, and attending
I hate you, bro.
Yale University. But nah, yeah. Right now the plan is to study econ and psychology. But like I don't remember the exact percentage, but there's like a large percentage of kids who usually change majors after the first year there. And like Derek said, I definitely want to explore because there's a lot of things I'm interested in, like a lot. And like, I don't know, like being in a space like that where you have the freedom to choose what classes you're taking, what you want to explore, it's going to be really like enlightening and like powerful, I think, for sure.
I'll go next. I'll be going to Stanford University next year.
Ooh,
You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
I
I kind of echo exactly what Derek and Roberto said about what I'm going to study. I feel like it's kind of easy to say, boom, I'm going to college, boom, I'm on this path, easy, like no switch ups, no nothing, and then get there and things totally change. And so I'm kind of wary of really hard outlining exactly what I'm going to do, using like freshman year as an exploring period. With that in mind, I have this. It's not like there's just something attractive about that. And
yeah. Hold up.
I feel
Sorry,
like I'm gonna use that to steer me, but not
rewind that.
You cut out.
I'm gonna rub off for a sec.
Where'd I cut off at?
Just start from the
You hear
beginning
me?
of like
Not
being
from the
married.
beginning.
Yeah,
Being
The
being
whole
married, yeah.
time?
Not,
Okay.
no.
Alright. Oh,
Say
all right.
start. You said you don't want to follow a narrow path, but just keep an open mind.
yeah.
Cool. So could you continue?
Yeah. Keep an open mind. Oh yeah, but I have like this interest of business in the back of my mind steering me, but not necessarily pigeonholing me in a certain direction.
Next year I will be in Providence, Rhode Island, with my sister at Brown University.
Yes,
Johnny.
sir.
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Yeah. Another aspect of that is I'll be doing Army ROTC, which is the Reserve Officer Training Corps, and I think I want to study like international relations and continue studying Chinese language, in hopes of doing something in military intelligence after college. But like you guys said, there's a very good chance that changes within the first semester. So I think keeping my mind open, and I'm also interested in maybe studying education, and becoming like an education administrator after college. I don't know. It's really just like a lot, and Brown's really flexible with open curriculum, so I'll be able to study a lot. But I think you guys kind of hit the nail on the head where there's like kind of something in the back of your mind of what you want to do, that's kind of like not necessarily guiding you, but kind of motivating you. And I think that that's kind of like where I'm at right now as well.
I'm curious, what piqued your interest in ROTC? I've heard you like talk about it before, but I feel like it's
Yeah.
a very like unique, interesting path that not a lot of people pursue. And so like what kind of led you there?
Yeah. I think for me, like, I've always like loved history. I've loved like reading about it, watching movies about it and stuff. My dad was a history major. And so he's always kind of like, that's always kind of shed off on me. And I never really considered myself somebody who would like join the military. And I think one of the major things that like kind of shifted that to like where I realized like that's something that like I could do, was one of all people, Hayden Parkhill. He was a kid who grew up in a similar environment to me and did that. And while I have disagreements with who he is, that showed me that somebody who, you know, is like me can do that. But I think also like in AP US history, we were having a conversation about, you know, is the draft ethical? And there was a kind of one of the resources it was titled AWOL, the unexcused absence of America's upper class from military service. And it kind of talked about how like, I think it was like in 1950, like it was like, you know, 40% of Princeton's graduating class went on to serve in the military. And I think in like 2015, it was something like 2%, or, you know, it was like some like massive change. And it was talking about how like, how few people in the upper class serve in the military and kind of like do the legwork for our country. And I think for me that like, that always kind of like left a sour taste in my mouth. And I think that like that kind of motivated me. And then a mix of like always loving studying Chinese and seeing like the demand and current events of somebody who's like knowledgeable on both the language and the culture. I think I could like provide a service to our country that way. And then also just like doing something that's like, you know, again, cliche, like bigger than yourself. It like, to me, like joining the military is like somewhat of an exciting thing, especially like military intelligence being on like the forefront of like collecting information about like what's going on in the world and like processing it and like turning it into missions and stuff like that. That's something that seems like that's purposeful, you know, like I'm somebody who, if I wanted to, I could go to like a good college and immediately study econ or finance, and then, you know, do some internships with Goldman Sachs, you know, during the summers, and then graduate and just immediately go into that and like make a comfortable living for the rest of my life. And like, I could do that, but I don't know if I'd like be engaged or feel like purposeful or feel like I'm making a difference. And I think like for me, you know, doing some bit of service, and it's also just like, I'm really grateful for the upbringing I've had. So I feel like I have a responsibility to kind of like give back in some way. So it kind of like manifested itself in the military. But yeah.
Something I heard from both Derek and kind of John there was part of the like the business world being vanilla or sort of like cookie cutter, not necessarily purposeful. That's something I've been thinking a lot about too. It's weird because I feel like, again, like the sort of like standards we have for like success in business are like the Goldman Sachs or like the nice consulting job, the big three consulting firm job. And I feel like there has to be more out there, while at the same time I don't necessarily see it now. But like part of college for me is like, and everyone is just like that exploration and like seeing what else in business there is that can give me the sort of same like lifestyle, but like have purpose or just whatever anyone is trying to pursue. So like making both things work at the same time, something I'm interested in too.
Totally.
For sure. Cause like, I think it's interesting. Like Dylan said is, like when you go to like a school like Breck, a lot of us have privilege, like the majority of us. And like Dylan said, that's different in whatever forms it comes in. Like if you're not privileged in one area, you might be privileged in another. But I think, like it's so like important, like your college decision. Cause like a one way privilege can kind of manifest itself is it's easy to see like, it's easy to like disregard the people who are like working to, I don't know, like make a living for them or their family, you know? And I think like for me, one of the biggest things I've struggled with, like, especially the past like year and a half, like Dylan said, this is around the time, like I've gotten really close with Mr. Slack. And I think, if in this podcast, I'll cite him many times, but I think, but I think he's been really influential because he's kind of shown me this like path that like your influence is important. Like no matter where you're at in life, you can have influence on people. You don't have to be this CEO of this business to be influential. So I think it's like interesting because, like I said, for a large part of my life, I've always been, let me get mine. I'm going to do well in school. I'm going to go get this job. I'm going to go buy stuff for my family. I'm going to provide for them. And then that's going to be it, right? I'm going to live comfortably. But I think like recently I'm starting to see more like the importance of like, I don't know, like the value you give back to your community, your influence, and like what that has to do. And so, yeah, that's definitely something I've struggled with because like, in a sense, like I want to give back to my family, everything they've sacrificed for me. Like I still got a ton of family back in Ethiopia where stuff is it's not the best, you know? And so that's always stuff I'm thinking about. But at the same time, like I don't want to be just doing the same old job, doing the same old thing, like no, not really having any value past myself, you know? So I think that's a balance that needs to be that people need to reflect on because it's important to think about it.
With that, I think John, you're gonna give us a little bit of outro, but we want to be, I guess, wary of your time, but also just like not drag this on. So this is gonna be the end of our first episode together. Appreciate you guys for listening. Robera, Dylan, John, Derek, like you guys brought the heat. You guys brought valid points, and each of them are unique to your experience, but they can be relatable and understood by someone going through a very similar situation, whether that's with their identity, feeling guilt, or feeling like it's being repressed. These aren't easy conversations to have, but I mean, being with you guys for the past, it's like at least 10 years, it makes a difference to be able to call you guys like brothers, be able to call you guys family, and be able to have a raw conversation like this and share it with people in our community. It's not easy.
Yeah, I think that was basically everything I wanted to say in the outro, but better. That was well said, Derek. I agree. I'm really grateful that I'm able to like kind of have this conversation with you guys. I think this was a good start. And if you've made it this far on the podcast, that's awesome. I think so far, we will be having more raw and more lively discussions in the future. Hopefully this episode is seen as a lens so you guys can understand who we are as people a little bit better. So the discussions and the ideas kind of thrown around will kind of have some grounding in a personality and that you can kind of connect it to. So with that, I think we are going to end the first episode. If you have any advice, obviously we're new to this. If you enjoyed it, please let us know. But any questions, comments, or feedback, we can answer them in the next episode and we'll happily write back to you. But yeah, thank you for listening, and we'll see you guys next time.
Hit that like button, subscribe.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you. Yep.